Sebene Selassie, Jeff Warren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us back, Dan.
Good to be here.
Always great to have my party people with me. Seb, let me just start with you. To say the least, to state the obvious, money is an uncomfortable topic for most people. What kinds of caveats and disclaimers should we issue before launching into this conversation?
So many, but maybe just to be simple about it, that we're speaking from our own experience, which is limited by who we are and where we come from. Money brings up so many issues for people. We all have particular money stories based on where we're from, how we were raised, our own family backgrounds with wealth and income, but then societally. And we ourselves, the three of us, are positioned in a particular way as far as money goes, in terms of how we make a living now. We are not working class people anymore, if we ever were. And, that's a caveat that really should be named. We make our living in a very strange way, peddling meditation and sitting around doing nothing.
Who knew it was a job?
Getting paid for that. So
thank God.
So, yeah, to be really honest and also caring in this conversation, that goes for the audience listening when you're doing this internal conversation with yourselves, but also for the three of us as we do this publicly.
Jeff, anything to add on that score?
My important caveat is I'm here primarily for comic relief. That getting me to come on and talk about money is like getting a caveman to come on and talk about, I don't know, like nanotechnology. It's like, I like to lick my money.
Meaning you just this is not a thing you've thought about much, or not a thing you've had in your life, meaning you've never had money?
I would say just more like I'm just highly neurotic about it. And I've been determined to learn almost nothing about creating better habits. I mean, I have learned some things. It'll be fun just to be totally honest about, like, I don't think I've ever talked about money in public, but I do not feel like that I'm any kind of expert. Not only do I know nothing about business from that point of view, but from a purely personal growth development point of view, I'm barely further along the learning curve around how to deal with money than I was, 20 years ago, although there have been some steps. So as long as people know that, then they're not going to look for me for any kind of wisdom about it.
I think you're underselling the wisdom you can bring to the table. I'll just add a few other caveats and disclaimers before we jump in. One is that, as Seb, you have pointed out in our discussions leading up to this discussion, they're just, depending on what country you come from, depending on what kind of gender or pigmentation you identify with or have or whatever, that you're just going to have different views on this. And so, like, we're not trying to speak for everybody. And then finally, just to say personally, I mean, I think to say the really uncomfortable part, I think a lot of people, anybody who follows me on social media and gets a glimpse into my home, recognizes that after, 30 years as a anchorman, I am definitely not working class anymore. And I don't want to pretend to represent everyone. And I have a ton of irrational neuroses around this thing nonetheless, which is interesting / embarrassing. Enough throat clearing. Seb, let me just start with you again. What are some of your issues personally around money?
Just to pick up on something you just said about it being irrational. I don't think there's so much irrational as learned. I think we all have money stories. And so we have a relationship to money that's based on our experience of it. And so I definitely came with a lot of conditioning around money because of where I come from. I think this can be a familiar experience for some immigrants, especially earlier immigrants, the earlier wave of immigrants from certain places that come as what's sometimes called as brain drain, like intellectuals or professional class people immigrating to the US or Canada or Europe, and having a certain class back home, maybe an upper class, even though both my parents came from very poor backgrounds. My dad, through education, became part of let's say, professional class or upper class, and then coming here and being thrust into a middle or lower class. So that's a common immigrant experience. There's also the immigrant experience of being very poor from where you come from and then having more here and then engaging in remittance to back home. So that's also something we experienced, that we sent a lot of money back home. So even if we were earning a middle class, or my parents were earning kind of a middle class living here, so much money was sent back home that you're almost putting yourself in a lower class than what you would expect. So I think I had like a lot of confusion around money, of like even where I was. It wasn't like England where you could just tell by someone's accent or neighborhood, what class they fall into. So I was going to schools with upper middle class white kids, but then, didn't have quite a lot of money. On top of that, my dad was a Marxist revolutionary guerrilla fighter and leader. And so I had a lot of conditioning around money and class and what was good and what was bad. So I think I developed sort of this very, again, confused relationship to money and a real distaste for money, this perception that money is the problem and money being the root of all evil, and sort of dislike and a disdain for rich people as the problem. And I've done a lot of work over the years to first recognize that, and then start to really untangle what's going on there and my projections on money. And, maybe we'll get into sort of what we think money is and how it plays a role in our life. But I first had to sort of understand what my money story is, where it came from, and then start to really understand what I believed about money.
So growing up with a Marxist dad as an immigrant around kids who had more money than you ended up as a young adult with negative attitudes about money, a sense that it was inherently bad.
That's a great way to summarize it.
And how exactly did you untangle it? And like, where are you now?
I untangled it through a lot of just awareness. I would say, I mentioned this in our discussion before this call, that I had to do a lot of work around money, actually running Dharma centers, running Buddhist centers. So I was on the board of multiple Buddhist centers for a long time. And I also ran a Buddhist center. I was executive director of one. And I came from nonprofit management before that. So I was working mostly in youth programs. So I was also constantly fundraising for many years. And so I had a relationship with like, what is money? How do we relate to money? And Jeff held up a book that I gave him, The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist, which is a fantastic book. And I learned so much from her, actually doing a workshop with her at some point on my journey. And so part of it was just having to deal with money a lot, having to ask for money for poor people. And then having to deal with money in the context of Dharma organizations where there's it's very different relationship to money, where this thing called dana or generosity, where a lot of the teachings are offered not as a fee for service, but on donation. And then people are invited to give money to support the teachings or the teachers. Or the teachers. And so it had like that whole process I had to shift my understanding in relationship to money because it wasn't as clear cut, and there had to be a lot of internal work around money for me to be able to explain that to people and have them understand it. So I guess to say there are a lot of steps along the way. It wasn't sort of one thing, but I definitely think that my professional reality of fundraising, of working in nonprofits, working with poor people, seeing how money can help or not help a situation, started to shift my relationship to money. And maybe I can talk about where I'm at with it after we talk a little bit more. Yeah.
You want to hear us get neurotic before we start saying anything constructive? Fair enough. I think that's probably a good plan. It's interesting, Jeff, you said before that you were really neurotic about this. And, the three of us, we're not only friends, but we also are kind of in business together. We talk about money. We do these meditation party retreats together, and there are money issues that come up as part of that. That's just one aspect of it, and there are others. And in those conversations, I always feel like the stammering mess, and the two of you always seem really grounded and fine. And so I'm a little surprised to hear you say that you've got a surprised, but compassionate nonetheless, Jeff. To hear you say that you've got some baggage around this.
I mean, Actually, I have gotten a lot better in a lot of ways. There are certain things that I don't get as freaked out about around money anymore, or as I'm more comfortable with. But then there are still, I think it's true what Seb says, that the stories of how that happen when you're young around money end up having this real influence. The issues of self-worth around and money have been a big theme for me that I've done a lot of work around. I've looked a lot at. So, and I'm still in process with it. So, my background is my mom came from very small town, working class Canada, and she kind of had always and still has a thing where she just doesn't feel comfortable around money, around like the culture of like rich people. Not that we, grew up in that, but we grew up kind of like, because my dad made money as a business guy, so we were like, upper middle class. But she always felt like uncomfortable in that scene. So that kind of played, it kind of landed. And then also my parents were very much like scrimping and saving. They worked really hard to get themselves to where they were. So there was a kind of intensity around money at home, around always having to be saving and always having to never, we were not big spenders, very, very, had that kind of mindset, kind of almost like depression era mindset. And so it made me kind of have like a bunch of threads came in. Like I began to have a kind of aversion around thinking and talking about money. I felt kind of uncomfortable around people with money and being in a kind of wealthy scene. And then I had my own stuff around just from childhood things of not feeling good enough. And so when it came time for me to go out in the world and not when I was getting a job, because early on when I just had jobs, that was fine. You're doing an exchange, although I had challenges with that too, related to my ADHD. But once I came out, started to do meditation teaching, it's a lot about being comfortable saying that you have the inherent worth, and that and you're asking people for money. It's like what she was saying, what Sebene was saying about the dharma scene. Like I remember the first time I offered meditation classes, like whatever it was, 15 years ago. I did it for free the first time, and then I had a meditation night where I always did it for free. I worked my ass off putting everything together, but I literally would not even charge like $2 for people to come in. I wouldn't even ask for donations. And it was a big thing for me to finally offer the very first teaching where I actually asked for a tiny little bit of money. And I think it's really connected to your worth. And that's been the thing for me to begin to see, okay, there's some things to learn about this, that I'm being kind of very neurotic about this. And if I want to be able to support other people, then I need to be able to be supported myself. It's very reasonable. But getting to the stage where I can begin to talk about that and ask for what I need has been a process. And Sebene will tell you, she still rides me about this. Like, I remember Sebene saying one time, I love this, that she does these different online courses and that she has a sliding scale, as do I for a lot of my offerings. And that in that sliding scale, there's no option to not offer something. That even at even if it's just like 5 cents or $1, because this is a lesson that really stayed with me. She's like, because it's an energy exchange. There has to be a sense in which you're in exchange, and like that's part of the agreement. And that if you don't, to not have that is to create a kind of imbalance. And that really landed with me. Do you want to say something about that, Sebene? Because that was super helpful when you kind of laid that out for me.
Yeah, I always have options for pay what you can, but paying something is really important, or offering something. Online, it doesn't work that way. But if it were in person, maybe it's somebody volunteers in some way to support the space. Or
probably too late for me to rethink this, but I have given away well over 1,000, maybe multiples, free subscriptions to danharris.com. So I probably should have said, give me a nickel or more. But Jeff, just to get back to you, you talked a lot about this kind of the self-worth issue as it relates to money, which I think will be not uncommon for people listening. Do you have a sense of like where your lack of self-worth comes from? Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah. I think it comes from, I think it's fairly common. I think it comes from, I was a challenging kid. So I got a lot of messages that how I was problematic. I internalized those. And I think lots of people get a similar message, and some have more resiliency or find their own ways to counter that narrative. But when I was young, I didn't, I I kind of really took it in without realizing I took it in. And I wouldn't have known that that was the case for myself even in my 20s. It was only later, I started to realize that this is kind of really in a basic way in the dynamics of how I am. Even like say around, there's like a part of me that wants to be liked. Like I tip a lot because I think I'm generous, but also because I think there's a part of me there that feels like I want to be liked. Like in other words, the flip side is I'm worried that I wouldn't be if I don't do the right thing, or if I don't. That was the thing, you grow up with this conditionality. If I am this way and this way, I will be liked, I will be loved, I will be accepted. But if I'm this way, I won't be. So you begin to sort of strategize how to get through your life, and money is definitely part of that. Like how you, the way you spend it, the way you use it to support others, the way you feel comfortable asking for yourself to be supported. So I think that's been, and I think that not being good enough is actually part of a larger scarcity principle that people have around just lack in general. Like not enough time, didn't get enough sleep, don't have enough money, don't have enough this, don't have enough that. Like I think your own insecurities play into that bigger story of the insecurity of the culture. So it's then affected how much money I think I needed to make to support my family and all of these things.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. And listening to you talk, Jeff, your description of what it was like at home for you with these parents who, had some money, but also had a kind of depression era mentality and were constantly saving, and there was like intensity around this. That sounds very similar to the way I came up. My parents were doctors, but both of them had come from not very, very much not wealthy families. And when in my youth, we really did not have much money. We were not poor by any stretch, but we were solidly middle class, if not a little bit below. And it was exacerbated by the fact that we lived around a lot of wealthy people. And that created this sort of comparing mind that we'll talk about. The other thing that fed into my money attitudes were a couple other things. One was, I think my story is very American. Jeff, you grew up in Canada. Seb, you grew up here and also had an immigrant experience. For me, I have immigrants, like every American does, in my lineage. But I grew up watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. I don't know if maybe young people listening to the show don't remember that show, but it was basically the precursor to MTV Cribs, where you would, get to go into the homes of wealthy people. And I just had this idea that my parents were chumps because they were doctors. They actually went on to become quite successful, but they weren't when I was, in junior high and high school. And I was just like I was not going to live the way they were. I was not going to scrimp and save and be intense around money. I also, another memory, and I've talked about some of this publicly, but I'll say it again here. Another memory is they took me and my brother to France when we were like 10 or something like that. We very rarely traveled for the sake of travel alone. So they were academic physicians. They would often get invited to give talks on their research, and they would use that as a way to afford the travel for the family. Not always, but often. And so that was what we did when we went to Europe. And we were in Paris, and the people who were paying for our travel put us up at a very fancy hotel, the Hotel Regina. I remember it to this day. I actually took my son back there recently because we were in Paris. It lives in my mind as incredibly opulent, and actually, having been there recently, it is quite a luxurious hotel. And I remember walking in there and thinking, yeah, this is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to live. Not like my parents, who drove what I considered to be shitty cars, and they were super careful about turning the heat on in the winter. We would wear down parkas in the winter in Massachusetts, which was, uncomfortable. And so it really gave me this idea that, if you're having to scrimp and save, something is off. I do not want to do that. And I guess the only other thing I'd say that I learned recently is that I always knew that my great grandfather had taken his own life. But I didn't really know why. And this is my father's grandfather. He was an immigrant from Russia, Jewish guy, came to this country, not super hospitable to Jews at that time, and in the early 1900s, and just was a hustler, con man, really. He was a crooked bail bondsman and got busted doing that. there are articles about this that my former executive assistant, Amy, shout out to Amy Breckenridge, found. And you can read the articles about this guy, my great-grandfather. And they ended up putting his head in the oven in the family home, and his family discovered him. And I think that dude's blood is I know his blood is running through my veins, and his mental energy is running through my mind. And so that's why this is such an uncomfortable topic for me, because on the one hand, it's obvious that I am well off. On the other hand, this causes me so much anxiety. And so just trying to be open about that. Anyway, I said a lot there. Any response to not only what I said, but what you guys said, or any further reflections before we turn to something a little bit more constructive?
First of all, I think this is very constructive, and points back to what you started with in calling your money anxieties or your, worrisome relationship to money as irrational. And it's not irrational, it's conditioned. And you just laid out a lot of that conditioning for us. And it's really important for us to understand what our money stories are, because we have, each of us, our personal money stories, and we're living in a larger context that has like some bananas money stories, really toxic cultural stuff. Lynn Twist, again, she talks about them as these myths about money that, there's not enough, like there's this scarcity that we all feel, like this panic that's really based in our fear of survival and security. And then that more is better, right? So we're conditioned, we get all of these comparisons and all these ideas about how much we need. So not only do we think there's not enough, but then we're like, but more, And then the third one I think is really powerful that she talks about, which is that we can't change these things. Like that this is the truth of our culture and that it's not changeable. And I really, you all know Robert Caro, the famous presidential biographer. He talks about power, and he said something that's always stuck with me, that, in studying all these great, powerful guys, he thought about the axiom that, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And he said that power can corrupt, but it's not the only thing it does. Power is kind of a neutral force. It just means the ability to influence. But the only thing power always does is power reveals. And I feel that's true about money too. Like money is this resource. It has the power to influence and to affect things in our lives. It's not inherently bad, but it reveals a lot about our conditioning. And we have a lot of conditioning, and especially, these conditionings that lead us into the scarcity or greed mindset can really affect like how we are with money in the world. So yeah, writ on a larger scale, it's chaos.
Yeah, money is basically the current of money moving through your life is the current of survival. That is kind of what it is for a lot of people. It's and all your issues around survival come up around it. That's why I like the reframe around what I was saying before about exchange. That it's almost like this exchange of energy that is out there in the world, and of which money is a part. But really the movement is sort of like energy and wealth. Wealth meaning what wealth you have, what capacity you have, what in all the ways that wealth is true, and that there can be a kind of a healthy way to look at it is just like that is. There's a constant exchange between people, between elements, and that if you could see it in this larger way, it would be so much less neurotic. But instead, we're in this tight, contracted way around the literalness of just the money and the balance in the bank account. From that, all of our behaviors roll out,
Yeah, and of course, we're speaking personally as people who are not in survival mode, even if sometimes our nervous systems act like they are around money. Yeah, and so, right. Not to dismiss the influence of power or money or any kind of resources in our lives and the negative consequences they can have. The chaos includes a lot of, injustice and really messed up distributions of wealth and money. But yeah, we can only really speak to the personal because we're not money experts and this isn't our job.
You said before, Seb, and I agree with you, that our money hangups are not irrational. They're conditioned. They're based on the conditions of our lives, the pre-existing conditions of our lives, and the lives of our forebears. How does doing the work that we just did, saying aloud or saying to yourself what your personal money story is, how does that help you get to a saner position vis-a-vis money?
Well, again, this is speaking from the place of not basic survival, let's say. That because that's the only place I can speak from. I've never feared for housing or food or clothing, and so that's a very different reality. So again, speaking from my place of going through my money stories from some relative stability around money as a resource. So these false narratives that are running our lives and making us feel like our ideas about money are irrational. Like when we start to explore our conditioning around money, then we can start to see that, this is coming from some old idea I have that's conditioned by, yes, my parents or the larger culture or my grandfather or great grandfather, and start to untangle what's true and what's not. Like, what is enough? Am I really at some kind of danger of not having enough? Or is this some old tendency, old pattern that's just playing out because I haven't examined it, I haven't uprooted it?
And would you say, Seb, for you that is necessary and sufficient, or necessary but not sufficient? Meaning, would you say awareness is the first step, and then we need some practices, for making sure that when we're in a money conversation, we don't let our old conditioning come roaring back? Or is the awareness enough to kind of do it?
I mean, for me, it's like with everything that there's, it's a garden that continues to need tending. Like the weeds can come. And, like the conversations we've had have been, I mean, Dan, you were saying you're neurotic in those conversations with us, but those conversations are helpful for me too. To be honest about money with friends. A generation ago, or maybe not even, like that wasn't very common. People didn't talk about money with each other. It was a very hush-hush kind of thing. And now, with a lot of my friends, we know how much we make, how much we have or don't have. And I have friends of varying difference of including us in this conversation. But I have some friends who were born extremely wealthy or married to an incredible amount of wealth. And some friends who, really live paycheck to paycheck. And so how do we have those conversations and conversations of care? I have one friend actually recently lost her mom, and she was just kind of did not inherit any money, maybe inherited debt. And I encouraged her to do a GoFundMe, which she ended up doing, and she raised enough money to kind of carry her through until she could start working again. She was taking care of her mom over many months while she was ill. And we can't necessarily solve each other's problems with money, but we can support each other in both our attitude and relationship to money, but also how we're dealing with money. And as someone who's had money raised for me multiple times, that's a vulnerable place to be. And it's a really beautiful thing to be able to help others and to allow yourself to be helped around money.
Just to clarify, Seb, your experiences around your past health scares where your friends would kick in money because you were unable to work and dealing with cancer. Jeff, anything to add at this point?
Not only do we come from different circumstances in terms of our backgrounds and class and all those things, but we also have different kinds of minds. And there are certain problems I've had around money that are very much specific to being ADHD, where it's been hard to find jobs. It's been hard to keep jobs because of my cognitive style. I've had great jobs that I've then impulsively left and later been like, what was I thinking? I've been so overwhelmed and scrambled in my life that I couldn't find enough money and couldn't figure out how to get organized to get jobs. And that has also been part of the story. And part of the learning there is it's not just around seeing how you are specifically with money, but it's seeing how you are as a person in the world and then figuring out how to organize the structures of your life so that they can support you, money among them. And that's been a very long journey for me to figure out how I can support myself and my family based on the way I actually am. And I'm lucky enough that I've got to this place where I can, but I didn't for many, many years because it was just such a huge learning curve. And yeah, that's just an added stress to the piece there. It's not like we're all starting from different places and have different challenges in front of us. And there's this, the more you can be to learn about yourself and how you're wired, as well as learning about your money stories, the easier time you'll have of it. Otherwise, you just get thrown around.
What helped you with that, Jeff?
I had to really look and see under what situations, if I take away the money thing for a second, under what situations am I actually flourishing? And it turns out, oh no, it doesn't look like having a boss. It doesn't look like I need, like many ADHD people, I need constant novelty and excitement. Like the reason there's so many ADHD artists and entrepreneurs and people like that, it's like that's just where you're a bigger risk taker. And I had to kind of figure out who I was and then figure out, okay, what kind of structure can I build that will support me? So in the moment retreats, small little bits of writing that are manageable for my ADHD, like little mini meditations, like using my understanding myself so that I can create structures that work. And then how can I find compensation in that arena? And it all just, as I started getting more insight around it, started to just happen. But I'm really lucky because I think a lot of people with different kind of on the neurodiversity type challenges find it's a long struggle. Even right now, when it comes to organizing money, ADHD with the executive challenges, and I have major aversions around that and find it very challenging, and my partner does as well. And so we have a lot of anxiety, my wife and I, around money. Like, oh gosh, are we spending this intelligently? Do we have enough? Are we saving enough? There's a lot around that too.
Mm.
Seb, let me just go back to something you talked about before, which has come up repeatedly. It's this concept of enoughness, or I think to put it in the negative, which is I think more prevalent, which is not enoughness, insufficiency, lack, the scarcity mindset. What, if anything, do you do or would you recommend in terms of practices on this score?
I mean, I've done so many things around this, and some of it has been just really basic psychological work around what money is, and understanding it as this energy. I think it was interesting listening to both of you talk about your childhoods and that kind of tightness with money, which we didn't have a lot of money, but we were just like cavalier with it, especially my mom. And there wasn't a tightness. It was just sort of like spending anywhere, giving a lot of way. There's a lot of generosity in Ethiopian culture. Like, God forbid you told my mom that you liked anything that she was wearing or had, she would like give it to you. I mean, that's very common in Arab culture. I find it, and other African cultures. So yeah, it's common to have this very generous reciprocity, so that the generosity is going both ways. And so to be in a culture where there is this prevailing tightness, and then to constantly always be giving away is not a very wise way to be with your money. So some of it for me was also learning to, just kind of see where my generosity was coming from. Was it, a true giving? Was it performative? Was it sort of people pleasing? And then to see where my spending came from. Was it like because I wanted to get a hit from shopping or from, having more to kind of make myself feel better about other lacks that I felt in my life. And so it's that kind of continual checking of like how I'm being with money, how I'm relating to it. There's a period with my ex-husband where we were really tight for money, because of my continuing illnesses, because he was new to this country and building his career here. And we did this thing where, this was still back when we wrote checks for everything, where we would write on the memo line of the check, money is love. And for us, that was sort of a statement that we came up with to just recognize that this was like an exchange of care, whether it was for paying our rent or for some, treatment protocol that I needed outside of my health insurance, or that there was some kind of expression of care or love that was being instead of this tightness of like, oh, I have to pay for this thing and this thing, we don't have enough. And just that act of doing that for, for a few years actually really started to shift something for me. Every time I was writing a check out and would write that, sort of, okay, this is something that I'm doing for myself, and made me more sort of conscious and mindful about how I was relating to money. So there's so many practices, and again, to do them in community. So being in the nonprofit world and doing money work as part of staff development or organizational development, we would tell our money stories. I remember one board retreat for New York Insight Meditation Center. We spent it was a whole weekend retreat, and we spent a good part of it on money, just looking at what kind of money stories we were each bringing to the organization, that the organization held itself. These issues around like dharma being this pure generosity model, being some pure form, and an unsullied version of money, which was a lot of projections into itself. So yeah, and again, it's ongoing. It's not like I'm done now.
I love what Sebene was just saying there, and it actually reminded me of a kind of insight that I had that was very meaningful, that really unlocked something for me. And that was, not long after we had our first son, Sarah and I, we were really, really overwhelmed. It was COVID times, and there wasn't a lot of support. And we basically were like, okay, I think we need to try to find someone who could help us part-time. And my mom was really down on us for this. And, she was like, you should be able to do it all yourself. And her view of money was that, she did everything herself. My mom worked such a hard worker. She raised 3 kids and kept the whole house going and had a job as a librarian. And she was just like, and that you should never be and need to ask for help or spend it on that. And so I had a lot of shame that we first did that. And so I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine who grew up in the West Indies, and she just laughed at me. She was like, this is so different than where she was from, how people think about money. She's like, if you have any money, then the whole philosophy there is that you spend it on support and help, because that's how you spread the money around. That's what kind of it is to have this larger community and family, that you don't just hold it in here, and that you are generous with it, and you allow. And so when she grew up, and she grew up with, I guess, a family that had resources, but they had all kinds of different people who would come by, and like a gardener who would help out, and this person would help out. And now I admit I'm lucky that I had enough to be able to hire a nanny for twice a week. But having that like reframe for me is like, oh, this is just part of what it is to be in exchange with lots of people, like that I can be less tight about it and less worried about it. And I can let it go that way, so that I'm getting this support back. And that's how I'm going to need to do it. Actually, that's how we're going to need to do it in our little neurodivergent family. Is we're going to have to really see it as one big ecosystem here, and where everyone's got different kind of specialty roles. Because the idea that everything could happen in this one frontal lobe and it's going to do all the jobs, not going to happen. So that really unlocked for me. It's like, okay, I can be less uptight about that, and then just more trusting too of just the general. There's going to be times when there's more of it and times when there's less of it, and I can just have a much bigger picture around the ebb and flow and impermanence of money. And since we've had that, it's been a better culture at our house, certainly around money, and around just feeling like you're totally at sea.
You brought up impermanence, Jeff, and since we're having this conversation among meditators here, and many of us deeply influenced by Buddhism, in the Dharma, there's all of this talk of non-attachment. Easier said than done. Any thoughts on how we can practice non-attachment, as it pertains to money?
Well, this is the big picture that contemplative practice is hopefully moving you towards. This understanding that there's a way to feel secure that is deeper than just the conditions that are happening around you, whether those conditions are financial, emotional, whatever they are. This is the reason that I practice. Yes, there's all the ways in which I get small insights in the day-to-day. Absolutely, that I see ways in which I'm acting neurotically, that I can show up better for people in my life, for sure. But this basic thing of knowing that my life is changing and I will die, and the variables are out of my control, But is there somewhere in my experience right now that I can arrive in despite all of that? What for me it's space, for me it's or the feeling of being, or some part of it just being an animal body, the fact of the body itself, like putting my attention there. The longer I've meditated, the more I've found those things to be available. And then I'm in a much more centered place to make decisions about money, to make decisions about anything. And I think that honestly, I don't think there's anything more profound that a human being can do than that. That in terms of centering yourself in your life and finding a way. And that's not saying at all that there aren't intensities of conditions that need to be addressed. Of course they are. And there are disparities, and absolutely. But to be able to find in the moment something that is, to find the safety in the moment, whether it's through radical acceptance of the changiness of the moment or a connection to something that feels unchanging to you in the moment, that is the direction. And every deep practice is pointing you that way. So that's why I have my daily practice.
Meditation is not just a quick fix. It is a practice to change all parts of your life, and you don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. Happier Meditation app meets you where you are so you can realize more than you thought possible with a flexible approach that grows with you and wisdom from some of the world's most insightful teachers. Happier helps you get more out of meditation so you can give more to every part of your life. Go to happierapp.com and start meditating in a way that truly fits you. So much of my stuff around money is this search for safety, security, which is pretty elusive and may not be even attainable. And there is actually, in contemplative practice, in meditation, whether it's on the cushion or off, this capacity to like just gently drill into the present moment, into what's happening in your body in a way that isn't going to quote unquote solve the problems, but can calm you down so that you can approach those problems in a saner way, because you've gotten a sense that actually no, security is an illusion. The only real security is being able to tune into what's happening right now. You're making a face. Am I close?
No, yeah, totally. But I would put it as, so this is the thing. Different people experience this deeper end of practice in different ways. What you're ultimately moving towards is a sense of being okay, I feel like, independent of conditions. And some people find that through a radical acceptance of the insecurity of conditions, that the true acceptance that things are constantly changing, and there's a kind of wisdom in insecurity. And that ends up being a thing that makes them, that they can rest in a way, without grasping. But another person might describe it as there's just a continual increasing sense of space, no matter what situation you're in, that you can trust the space will be there or the ground will be there. And that ends up being a kind of stability in changing conditions. So you find it in different ways, but it's in the moment. It's not looking for it anywhere else. It's in the moment right here. The more you commit to understanding the moment, the more I think it's possible to find this capacity to be with all moments with more sanity and presence. I think that's what I'm trying to articulate, perhaps not as successfully as I might. I'm curious how Sebene would describe it in her experience. We have many conversations about this, don't we, Seb?
I love the way you put it, this freedom that's not based on the external conditions. And money for many people becomes this search for clinging to some sense of security or certainty. And it can't be that. I mean, the only thing we're certain of is that we're going to die. It's the only certainty we have. And yet so many people are trying to protect themselves from that with money. So it becomes this like kind of, false bubble wrap that we place around us with just a lot of stuff that doesn't bring that sense of security. And so it doesn't mean that we don't have stuff or that we don't relate to money. But yes, as you said, finding that sureness, that's that deeper inner sense of security, not on the outside, but on the inside.
And when death shows up, I'm going to throw my stuff at death. I'm going to be like, oh yeah, take this. I'm going to throw all my iPads at him. I'm going to throw, I'm imagining it's a him with a scythe, the tall, skinny dude. I'm going to throw a couch at him and be like, yeah, we bought this $2,000 mattress once when we were feeling flush. See if you can get me through this.
Well, I bring up death not to be morbid, although I think about it a lot, being someone with stage 4 cancer, that, this idea of you can't take it with you, how much is enough? I mean, we see outrageous amounts of wealth in this country now, in this world, and it's obscene. And we will always have differences of resources. That's just the nature of being human. So it's not to condemn money or condemn wealth, but I think that question is a question for ourselves, and this is a great question in the collective and in community of like, what is enough?
Yeah, the Buddha himself, even though he was an itinerant monk and not making any money, but he did hang out with wealthy merchants and kings and stuff like that. So he wasn't vilifying money.
Yeah, and he asked them for money.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then just to pick up on a few other points you made there, Seb, this contemplation that Joseph Goldstein, my friend and longtime meditation teacher person you guys are both familiar with, has actually asked me, as a practice to really contemplate that. Like, what is enough? Make that a little koan, a little riddle, something that you puzzle over. It's a great actionable piece of advice for listeners. And then another Josephism that's coming to mind, and this wings back to some of the stuff you guys were saying a few minutes ago. He often says, don't waste your suffering. Like, whatever is troubling you, that is an alarm bell. That's something that you can wake up and investigate mindfully. And so money is a portal to a lot of meaning. This dirty subject that we don't want to talk about is actually a gateway to some real self-discovery, or even discovery of the lack of self.
Yeah, look at all the things we've sort of touched on, like all the classic dharma hits, greed and clinging and aversion and impermanence. And it's there with anything, but money is just like such an outsized expression of that in this culture.
Just a few other things that really help me in this regard with, I won't say irrational, my conditioned neuroses around money and safety and security. One of them comes not from the Dharma, but from Stoicism. In Stoicism, there's this idea of the premeditation of evils. I think it's premeditatio malorum, I think is the Latin or something like that. But just to go through, sometimes I will just picture in my mind, like, all right, Dan, you're freaking out. Okay, let's bring to mind, what's the worst case scenario? Let's play it all the way out. Even if I don't like the picture, I'm always alive and everybody's alive in my family. We're, I recognize that may not be true for everybody, but for me, when I play it all the way out, I don't like it, but I can deal with it. And that's very helpful. And then the other thing is, and this is related, is I've been deeply influenced by the work of Kristen Neff in the field of self-compassion, and also Ethan Kross, who has done some related work in sort of our ability to reprogram or counter-program against our inner chatter, which is often negative and paranoid, and just developing the ability to to self-soothe, to talk to myself, not to tell myself fantasy stories about how everything's going to be fine, but more along the lines of the Stoic thing of like, yeah, everything may not be fine, and you'll do your best in whatever situation. I mean, that's one definition of hope, which is I can't control what's going to happen, but I know I can do my best, whatever happens. So I said a lot there, but did any of that land for you guys?
Yeah, it's really helpful. And I think part of that for me has been that practice, we're sort of describing different practices, has been generosity. And again, sort of understanding where my generosity is coming from, but also participating in it regularly. So tithing my income, really giving that a lot of thought and consideration of, what I want to contribute to. And also for me, just making a case for, yes, there's the worst case scenario, and there's also kind of the best case scenario. Like, I haven't been someone who's had, for various reasons, including illness, hasn't had kind of a stable life in a lot of ways of building a retirement fund or, having generated much wealth. I mean, I have a good income now and I can take care of myself, but, starting also to think about the future without that clinging to scarcity, also planning, right? And so there's that balance. And I think that sometimes we think we need certainty, but that's not possible. But we may need balance around money and how we relate to it.
What's the difference between certainty and balance?
Well, certainty is this idea that like we can protect ourselves from all inner and outer harm, and that, you know, we can, if we have all the money, if we have sort of like this more is better, not enough, that's somehow going to make us secure. And we've gone through all the reasons why that's not true. But there can also be this like, oh, well, money doesn't matter, you know, and I'm just going to move along in sort of this itinerant Buddhist way that's not possible if you don't have the societal conditions that the monks and the nuns are going to be supported by the community, or, you know, whatever models of reciprocity that might exist. Like, we're in a culture where we need to take care of ourselves. And so how do we move from this clinging to certainty to a balance of like, okay, what is it that I need and how do I plan? And those are things I've had to learn for myself, because I wasn't taught that by my parents, who had no clue. And my early conditioning wasn't really giving me a healthy relationship to money. I just thought it was bad. And so, you know, I've had to later in life, you know, middle age, start to think about, oh, okay, well, what am I planning for, you know?
I would think like a principle for me that's been really huge, and is this principle of interconnectivity or interbeing, or that I think about that a lot. I had this friend, I still have this friend, Ellen Springer. She has this awesome consulting company called Spring Strategies. And she helped me through a hard period where I had no money and I needed some rethinking around it. And she used to say, free money from its misery, like free the money. And like she had this, like her thing was that money needs, it's like everything. It should be in constant motion, in constant movement. It doesn't mean you're not going to save, but thinking about it as like pooling it in one place and not going anywhere, it's like it gets stagnant. And that I often think of this in my life, like I don't know that I don't have a great savings or very much savings. We don't own our house, but I know that for me, the practice of being generous with my money, the practice of being generous with my connections, allowing people to be generous for me, the constant this deliberate cultivation of more interconnectivity in my life, that is the thing that's going to support us, my family and I, as we get older, more than any money will. And I really have confidence in that. And so it helps me not be so tight around it. So just, not that I'm not going to be a responsible parent and try to make sure that, you know, there's a certain amount of money for my kids' education. But at the same time, I've gotten much more easygoing about what that wealth might look like and where it's going to come from. Because money wants to be free. It all wants to be free. It's like, let the little bunnies go.
I love that. I love that so much. And it brings it back to relationship, which is so important. As we're having this conversation, as we have conversations and more people start to really tackle this with that sense of like, yeah, let's free it. There's a thing on retreats, on meditation retreats, called the Dana talk, where at the end, you know, it's explained that people have paid for the retreat, but that only pays for sort of room and board, and the teachers receive their payment by the generosity of people at the end of the retreat deciding how much they want to offer. And a lot of teachers hate giving the Dana talk. And I actually love it, because it is this opportunity to, as you're saying, Jeff, like, you know, free the money, you know, pour money. We're like just projecting all this stuff on it, and it's hanging out there as a neutral force of power or influence. And, you know, we can do anything with it. We can relate to it in any way we want. And so, yeah, let's free ourselves to have a healthier, more open, more connected and generous relationship.
Do you say that in the like, how do you tell me what I'd love to hear.
I do. I say pour money. You know, I start out by saying pour money, like, you know, because everybody kind of tenses up. You know, the people, the students, the yogis are like doing calculations in their head, like, well, there's, you know, 100 people here, so if everybody gave this much, and then they divided between 4 teachers. Like, I'm saying I've done that. That's why I know what's going on in people's minds, and, you know, to just like rest back and stop the calculating, stop them. Is this enough? Is it too much? Da 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 da, and really just feel into it. It becomes its own practice, right?
So I'm hearing a couple of practical things that I just want to put my finger on. One is, and this goes right back to the time of the Buddha, generosity is a practice in non-attachment. If you can make the habit of being generous, obviously you want to do it responsibly, but if clinging and craving are a big part of the problem when it comes to money, well, being generous is a very interesting antidote. And then,
Can I add one thing there?
please.
That according to the teachings, the Buddha, every time he entered a new community, the first teaching he would give is generosity. So it wasn't mindfulness or the Four Noble Truths or metta. It was generosity was always the first teaching.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, where are you being generous from? Because that matters. If you're generous from a desire to want to be liked or to, in some way, like I'm just trying to manipulate the situation, then it doesn't have the same effect. Can it really be offered from a place of, well, whatever you want to call it, a full heart, not wanting anything in return?
I think we can stipulate that there is no security in a world characterized by impermanence. That's an illusion that creates a lot of suffering when we chase it. Given that we are going to look for security probably no matter what, maybe look in places that are slightly more fruitful. So blind accumulation of money is probably going to be less satisfying than the building of a network of relationships that you can count on. And that I heard that from you specifically, Jeff.
100% how I'm trying to live. Trying, in the operative word.
Before we go, I want to, we've been kind of dancing around a thing that, Seb, I think you very helpfully have named, but all of us have referenced it. We've been trying to be, I'll speak for myself, I've been trying to be so careful, as I always am in money discussions, because I don't want to piss anybody off. I don't want to alienate anybody and have them say, oh, this fucking rich guy, he doesn't understand shit. And so we're all kind of stepping really gingerly here and naming that, yeah, we're privileged or lucky or advantaged. And I think that's very helpful and worth doing. And I think maybe we should take a more forthright look at it. And in that spirit, I'm going to read a message we got from a subscriber at danharris.com. This is from Diane, who I think is one of the people we're trying not to alienate here. And she writes, I'm quite older and do not have financial security. It's a horrible place to be in, emotionally and physically draining. Can't believe I'm stating that publicly. Cringe. I very much look forward to your podcast addressing this real concern for so many of us with my three favorite people. Yeah, so maybe we should talk, again, from our, oft-named position of privilege about what we might say that would be useful to somebody who has, real pressing, urgent financial concerns that are, much more acute than anything that we're dealing with.
I'll just say, I don't feel there's any practical advice around money I could give Diane because I don't know her situation. That's not my area of expertise. But as someone who has experienced acute financial distress and fears, what Jeff was pointing to, and I think we've been sort of talking about this whole time in terms of relationship, is really important. I mean, the fact that Diane is dating it publicly is a huge step. There can be so much shame and fear around money. And that's where community and relationship is so important. I was speaking earlier about the Ethiopian context, and the reciprocity is also about support in times of hardship, not just generosity around, things that you're naming that you like. And that interconnection is not replaceable by material resources. It is the ultimate resource, as Jeff was pointing to. And so that reaching out, whether it's to friends and family or to institutions or support groups or interconnection that exist around you, I think it's really important to have that as the foundation.
Yeah, and then they're reaching into the self-compassion, just the practice, and it's kind of like having intense chronic pain, of which I meet lots of people, or people in like debilitating situations where they've got a major illness, and this is it. It's there. It's going to be there for the rest of their life. The practice can be really supportive to find a way to soothe yourself and calm yourself and come to center, and so you can make clear decisions from that place. I mean, all the things we've been talking about, I don't think that it's super relevant there.
As I was listening to both of you talk there, I was remembering a personal story. As you both know, one of the hazards of our line of work is that anecdotes are gold, and you can't remember when you told what story to who. And so I'm always, every time I say something personal on the show, I'm like, yeah, people have probably fucking heard me say this before, but I'm going to say it again. Anyway, this story, because it involves you, Seb, for my 50th birthday, which was 3.5 years ago, you gave me a painting that was done by one of your friends. And I really like the painting. It hangs in my office. And one day when I was sort of moving it around, I saw in the back that it had a name. There's a name of this artwork has as a name, and the name is "My Open Heart Keeps Me Safe," which, given my conditioning, made me, I found it a little barftastic the first time I heard about it. Like, oh my God, my open heart keeps me safe. What the hell does that mean? I've really kind of taken it on as a koan over the years, as somebody who's an anxious person and is always, scanning the environment for threats. Am I okay? Do you like me? Am I okay? Am I okay? Do you a constant inner chatter of that variety. And what I heard in both of your comments in different ways was a reflection of that piece of wisdom. Like, your open heart, meaning, are you creating relationships? Are you open to asking for help? Are you helping other people? Are you not closed off, not contracted? Well, that actually is likely to keep you as safe as possible. And then second, when you were talking about pain, Jeff, psychic or physical, counterintuitively, often the route is to, throw open the doors and experience it. Not always, but sometimes. You have to titrate it. You have to be careful about this. But often having an open heart in relationship to what's bothering you is the way to deal with it.
So can I just say that that painting was made by my friend Allison Strickland, who is the person who I mentioned who lost her mom, who now has the GoFundMe. So she is actually an example of that in this, because she is opening her heart to say, I need help. And, that one time when I was asking for support and feeling all sorts of ways about it, a friend of mine, Susan, who's since passed away from breast cancer, said something that James Barras, another Dharma teacher, had told her, that when you seek support, you're actually a field of merit.
Oh, I love that.
That you're giving other people the opportunity to build their own merit, to build their own goodness. And so that gift is reciprocal, actually.
I'll put a link to Allison's GoFundMe in the show notes. If anybody wants to support Allison, thanks. I know I want to, because she makes my office brighter every day. Well, I love you guys. Thank you for doing this.
Love you too. Thanks for this opportunity. Yeah. And, may there be more conversations about what's cringy.
That reminds me, Dan, can you give me $5?
Always, buddy. Always.